Welcome to the podcast. I hope you enjoy my stories. Threads of Blood by James Bryan Love. Copyright 2025. All rights reserved. Now let's get into this horror story.
The motel room smelled like rust, sweat, and rot. The thin carpet was sticky underfoot, and the fluorescent light flickered weakly, buzzing like an insect trapped behind glass. Kira Vance stood in the doorway. Her stomach knotted, her palms slick with sweat. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around and leave, but she couldn't. Not when the call had been so urgent, not when Detective Aeren's eyes had held that same mixture of hope and terror. She had seen what her gift could do, but it didn't always work. Sometimes it failed completely, leaving her blind in the middle of a reading. Sometimes it surged violently, slamming her into a vision so raw, it left her gasping, muscles twitching, body racked by pain she didn't understand. The victim lay sprawled across the sagging mattress, eyes covered with two perfectly polished silver dollars stamped 1940. The air clung to her skin, heavy with the coppery tang of blood and ammonia. Her body was stiff but not grotesque. The killer had been careful, precise, almost clinical. The incisions across her chest and abdomen were symmetrical, elegant, the kind of methodical horror that made Kira shiver. She took a slow step forward, hand trembling, and her mind hummed with anticipation. Touching the foot of the bed was like flipping a switch. 1 second, the room was quiet, still, nothing. The next, her senses shattered. Every nerve ending felt like it was being lit from the inside. Her consciousness was ripped apart and stitched together in fragments. She was the victim, screaming internally, her lungs burning as if she were inhaling knives. Each heartbeat thumped like a drum of agony, each second, a blade slicing deeper. She could feel the knife sliding under ribs, the subtle resistance of flesh, the hot wash of blood as it pooled and ran. She gagged, tasting iron in her mouth. Then, without warning, her perception snapped. She was the killer. Standing over the body, hands steady, watching life drain away with clinical detachment. No horror, no pity, only the meticulous satisfaction of a mind executing a carefully rehearsed ritual. She could feel the weight of each movement, the careful polish of the coins, the positioning of the eyes, the exact tilt of the head. Every motion was precise. The juxtaposition of terror and control made her stomach turn, doubled her pulse, and sent her muscles into convulsions. Her gift betrayed her. It surged, then skipped, leaving fragments of the vision that twisted her perception. She stumbled backward, clutching the edge of the bed to steady herself, but the room kept spinning. She felt a tremor deep in her chest, radiating outward as if every nerve ending were firing independently. Her lungs burned, her stomach quaked, her vision fractured into shards of motion and color she could barely interpret. She tried to pull herself out of the vision, tried to push it away, but it clung like tar, dragging her back into the nightmare. Hours later, she awoke on the floor, sheets damp with her sweat, muscles stiff and trembling. Detective Aeren was still there, crouched at the edge of the bed, eyes wide, lips pressed thin. "Kira, are you okay?" he asked, voice trembling, half awe, half fear. She didn't answer immediately. Her throat felt raw from screaming inside her own head. Her body ached as though she had been stabbed in every place the victim had been. And there was something else, something she couldn't shake, the residue of the killer's presence still lingering in her mind, whispering, mocking. She spoke then, and the voice that came out was not hers. Deep, deliberate, a man's voice, smooth and cold. Aeren flinched. Kira's hands shook, clawing at the carpet to keep herself upright. Her gift had surged again without warning, dragging her into the final moments of the victim's death, showing her the killer's calm satisfaction, and leaving her body broken and trembling in the aftermath. It's never like this," she whispered finally, voice returning to hers, though weak and ragged. "Sometimes it doesn't work at all. Sometimes it's like this." Her hand went to her head, pressing against her temples, trying to ground herself in her own identity. She remembered why she feared this. Her power was a double-edged blade, cutting her body as much as it revealed the truth. In one moment, she could see the world with unparalleled clarity, experience events as they unfolded in someone else's mind. But in the next, she could be left completely blind, deaf, paralyzed by the psychic feedback. It was unpredictable, violent, and utterly uncontrollable. The visions didn't care about her safety. They just tore through her until she could no longer separate herself from the pain she witnessed. Aeren finally moved closer, placing a cautious hand on her shoulder. "The second one. We've got images," he said quietly, producing a folder. The thought alone made her stomach twist. She shook her head, refusing to see, feeling the faint prickling of anticipation in her spine. But he pushed the photos forward anyway, and the instant her eyes fell on the middle-aged man in a public restroom, coins stamped 1945 glinting on his eyes, her body betrayed her. The vision slammed back into her without warning. She was pulled into the man's final moments, feeling the cool steel of the knife, the unrelenting precision of the killer's hands, the surreal sensation of the coin pressed against the skin. Then she was the killer again, hands moving, slicing, polishing the coins with a strange iridescent chemical that burned slightly under her touch. She screamed inside, though no sound came out, and when she finally came back to her body, her palms were blistered, fingers raw, as if she had actually held the chemical herself. Her body shuddered, trembling violently. The pain and terror weren't just psychological, they were physical, searing into her muscles, her nerves, her bones. The psychic feedback had marked her as much as the victims themselves had been. She collapsed onto the floor, the room spinning and buzzing, and understood with grim clarity. This was only the beginning. Each murder would be worse, each vision more violent, each failure of her unstable power more punishing. And somewhere behind the edges of these visions, she felt a presence, cold, patient, watching, waiting. Kira Vance closed her eyes, gripping the carpet, forcing herself to breathe. Her gift might fail her at any moment, or it might slam her into another nightmare with no warning. But despite the terror, despite the seizures, the burns, the collapse, she knew she had no choice. Someone had to see, someone had to understand what this killer was doing, even if her body, even her mind, tried to stop her. Kira Vance lay in the hospital bed, a thin sheet tangled around her trembling body. The room smelled of antiseptic, and the faint coppery trace of blood. Her ribs ached as though they had absorbed every stab the first victim had suffered. The monitors beside her flickered intermittently, each beep and hiss setting her nerves on edge, each flash of light feeling like the ghost of a knife's edge slicing through her vision. Sometimes her gift would fail her completely in these moments, leaving her blind to the psychic residue of death. Sometimes it surged uncontrollably, dragging her back into horrors she had no choice but to experience. It was like a fuse burning inside her brain, unpredictable, violent, and cruel. Detective Raines leaned against the counter, photographs in hand, his expression a mixture of hope, fear, and exhaustion. He was silent for a moment, watching her chest rise and fall, watching her fingers twitch as if she were still clutching at the edges of some invisible horror. "Kira," he started, voice low, almost unsure. "I have the next crime scene photos." She tensed, her eyes flicking toward him with a sharp panic. "Don't," she warned, her voice hoarse. "I can't, don't show me." But he didn't listen. Perhaps he was desperate, or perhaps he didn't understand. He spread the images on the bedside table. A middle-aged man in a public restroom, sprawled on the cold tile, a single perfectly polished silver dollar placed over each eye, stamped 1945. The wounds matched the first murder perfectly. The moment her gaze touched the photos, her psychic ability surged like an electric storm inside her skull. She gritted her teeth, arms trembling violently, and then she was gone. Her consciousness was ripped from her body and hurled into the final moments of the man's life. She felt the cold steel of the knife under her own fingers, the calculated pull, the deliberate insertion. The man screamed internally. His terror was so raw it burned against her bones. Each heartbeat was an explosion of sensation. She could feel the pressure of his hands against the tiles, the slick warmth of blood, as it spread beneath her fingers. Then, violently, her perspective flipped. She was no longer the victim. She was the killer, moving with surgical precision, polishing the coins with an almost religious reverence. Her body, though still in the hospital bed, mimicked each movement as though it had truly executed the murder. Fingers blistered from chemical burns, lungs burning, muscles quaking, she convulsed violently, hitting the floor beside the bed. Raines caught her before she could collapse completely, but her body had already endured the full weight of both perspectives, victim and killer, simultaneously. When she finally returned to her own body, gasping and trembling, the world felt wrong. The hospital room had warped, lights flickering unnaturally, shadows stretching and recoiling in ways that made her stomach turn. She pressed her hand to her head, trying to stabilize the relentless thrum of her own nerves, but it was no use. Her gift was uncontrollable, erratic, and dangerous. One moment it offered clarity, insight, understanding of the killer's methods. The next, It left her blind, paralyzed, or violently convulsing, her body unwilling to obey her own commands. Rains knelt beside her, his eyes wide. "Kira? You okay?" His voice trembled, as though he was afraid to say her name too loudly. She shook her head, silent tears streaking down her pale cheeks. "It's worse than the first one," she whispered. It's like I'm being torn apart from the inside, and it's not just me, I can feel him, the killer, and something else, something watching." The thought alone made her muscles tighten, her skin crawl. Something watching. Always there. In the edges of her visions, in the static between thoughts, in the moments when her gift flickered and sputtered, leaving her exposed. The awareness of another consciousness, patient, precise, waiting, made her chest tighten as though it were being compressed in a vice. "Look," Rain said, almost pleading. "We need your help. The police, we can't make sense of this. No connections, no motive. Just these murders, and the coins." He held up a photograph from the first crime, then the second, and she felt her stomach twist as the sequence unfolded in her mind. 1940, 1945. A pattern forming, counting years, counting deaths. She closed her eyes, trying to shut it out, but the visions wouldn't stop. Her psychic ability surged again, unbidden, unmanageable. She saw the killer polishing coins, felt the chemical burn against her skin. She saw herself there in the act, her own hands moving without her consent, carving the flesh, placing the coins, stepping back to admire the symmetry. She felt her bones ache as though they were being crushed beneath the weight of someone else's body, someone else's pain. And then came the aftershock. Her body betrayed her as usual, convulsions, tremors, sudden spasms. Her hands bled faintly, blisters forming where she had touched nothing physical. Her eyes swam with tears that burned like acid. For minutes, she couldn't distinguish her own heartbeat from the phantom thumping of the victim's final moments, couldn't separate herself from the killer's methodical calm. Rains caught her as she fell backward, holding her steady as she struggled for breath. "It's okay, Kira, it's over," he whispered, though neither of them truly believed it. Because she knew, deep down, it was only beginning. The killer hadn't been stopped, and her visions, unpredictable as they were, had only hinted at the next horrors to come. She pressed a trembling hand to the table where the second photograph had been laid. I don't know how long I can keep this up," she said, voice quivering. "Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. And when it does, it's like I'm living both deaths, both murders, at once. It hurts. It leaves marks, permanent ones." Rains nodded slowly, understanding the weight she carried, even if he could never truly feel it. "Then we take it slow, one step at a time," he said. But even as he spoke, Kira could feel a threat of something malignant, something beyond the killer himself, flickering at the edge of her mind, just beyond perception. She shivered involuntarily. Something was watching, waiting, and she wasn't sure she would survive it when it fully revealed itself. The hospital room felt colder now, the air thick with the metallic scent of blood lingering in her imagination. Her pulse raced, fingers curling into fists as though gripping against unseen forces. The coins, the pattern. She knew the next one would come, and her body and mind would pay. Her gift, for all its insight, was a curse, unpredictable, violent, and leaving her vulnerable every time it surged. And somewhere, beyond the edges of her consciousness, a presence stirred, patient, intelligent, malevolent. Watching. Waiting. Kira Vance pressed her face into the pillow, breath shaking, eyes squeezed tight. The images would come again. They always did. The murders, the coins, the cold satisfaction of the killer. And she had no choice but to see, to feel, to live it all. Because the city's blood-soaked streets would demand it. And she was the only one who could endure what the rest of the world couldn't bear to witness. Kira Vance followed Detective Rains through the rain-slicked streets of the city, each step echoing hollowly against the cracked sidewalks. The fog clung low, curling around street lamps like spectral fingers, and the distant hum of traffic was punctuated by the occasional scream of a siren. They moved from one crime scene to the next, methodically retracing the killer's steps, but with every step Kira felt the gnawing truth. The murders had no pattern. Different neighborhoods, different socioeconomic classes, different ages and races, yet something invisible tied them together. It was not geography or motive, but a deeper, almost imperceptible pulse threading through the air, the walls, and the faintest vibrations under her feet. Her psychic gift, as unstable as ever, flickered at the edges of perception. Sometimes she could tune into the echoes of death with crystalline clarity, experiencing every sensation of the victim's final moments. Other times it refused entirely, leaving her blind, deaf, and painfully aware of the gap in her perception. That unreliability gnawed at her, leaving her frustrated and terrified in equal measure. Today, it hummed faintly, teasing her senses, giving her glimpses of something lurking beyond her understanding, a presence buried inside the memories of the killer. The first scene they entered was a cramped apartment on the third floor of a weathered building. The smell of decay, cleaning chemicals, and blood lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. Kira's pulse accelerated as she stepped cautiously past the threshold, her fingers brushing against walls streaked with faint smears of dried crimson. She could feel the psychic residue of panic, of shock, and of methodical cruelty, but the images came in jagged flashes. Sometimes they were vivid and horrifying, other times, nothing. Her eyes flicked over the room, noting the silver dollar over the victim's eyes, polished to a glinting perfection, and then scanning the furniture, the walls, even the ceiling for some hidden pattern. Nothing here makes sense, Rains muttered, bending to examine the bloodstains on the floor. Age, gender, neighborhood, it's all over the place. What's connecting them? Kira didn't answer immediately. She could sense something alive threading through the air, something patient, calculating, watching. It was subtle, like a vibration in the walls, a hum under the floorboards, but it resonated deep in her chest. The psychic energy prickled at the edges of her mind, teasing her vision to life. Sometimes the pulse would explode into a full-blown vision, and sometimes it would sputter, leaving her staring helplessly at reality as though it were a wall of static. She leaned against the countertop, shaking slightly, and tried to focus. The hum of the overhead lights shifted, distorting in her perception, and faint whispers emerged from the electrical static, like broken radio signals coalescing into voices. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, each thrum a warning she couldn't ignore. Then her vision shattered. It began as a seizure, small and tremulous, fingers twitching uncontrollably, her knees buckling under her weight. The world blurred, fragmented, then vanished entirely. She was inside the killer's mind. The perspective was immediate, intimate, and horrifying. The metallic tang of fear flooded her senses. She could feel the victim's pulse, the heat of their terror, the panic rising as the knife approached. She saw the killer's hands, steady and deliberate, performing each movement with meticulous care. And then, there was something else. A presence, massive and aware, lingered just beyond the edges of consciousness. It was ancient, suffocatingly heavy, and it laughed, not out loud, but inside her mind, echoing off the walls of her skull. It was a force threaded through the killer's memory, a puppeteer behind the act. A cracked conduit, the voice said, deep, smooth and cold, like stone sliding against bone. So fragile, so unstable, and yet, potentially useful. Kira's mind reeled. She had never encountered this before, never during the visions of the killer's past. It was not the killer speaking, not entirely. This voice was older, more powerful, and it knew her. It knew the gaps in her ability, the moments when she could not control the psychic torrent. It knew when she was vulnerable. Her body shook violently, convulsing in spasms as her consciousness was torn in two directions, experiencing the victim's terror, while simultaneously being pulled into the killer's calm, deliberate precision. Her muscles refused her commands. Her lungs burned as if inhaling knives. Her fingers clenched, twisted, as though her own hands were wielding the blade she could not see. Blood rushed to her head, her vision flickering between jagged black and brilliant red. And then it spoke again. "Kira Vance," the presence said, almost with amusement. "I am Aeren. You feel the edges of me, don't you? The spaces your mind cannot fill? You are half-broken, imperfect. But you could be mine." The words stabbed deeper than any knife. Kira tried to pull back, to retreat into her own mind, but the connection was already established. It wasn't just the killer's memories anymore. Aeren was threading through her consciousness, learning, probing, testing. It knew the limits of her unstable psychic gift. When she came back, gasping for air, she found herself bleeding from her nose and ears, the faint electric hum still buzzing in her skull. Rains, crouched nearby, froze as he watched her. "Kira?" His voice was a whisper laden with fear. She swiped at the blood with trembling fingers, shaking her head. "It's something else," she said finally. "It's in there behind him, watching, waiting." Over the following days, Kira's condition worsened. Each visit to a crime scene became a gauntlet, a test of endurance and sanity. Her visions flared unpredictably, dragging her into the lives and deaths of the victims with such intensity that she sometimes couldn't distinguish herself from them. At other times, the gift failed completely, leaving her stranded, staring at reality, screaming in frustration. She tried to shield herself to block the visions, but Aeren's presence seemed to anticipate her defenses. It moved like a shadow in her mind, slipping past the barriers she set. In one apartment, she found herself kneeling on the floor before a body she had not yet known existed. The air was thick with the stench of iron and decay. Her hands shook as she lifted a mirror, only to see a fragment of the shadow behind the killer's eyes, a silhouette malformed, human-shaped, but impossibly wrong. She recoiled, nearly knocking the mirror to the floor, but the image persisted, flickering in on every reflective surface around her. Screens, glass, polished metal, every surface betrayed the presence of something watching, something alive in the psychic void. Rains noticed changes too. He recorded the odd bruises on her arms and torso, the cuts and abrasions she couldn't explain, the moments she went missing for minutes at a time. Sometimes he found dirt under her nails, marks like she had been dragged or struggled somewhere unseen. One night he arrived at her apartment to find her unconscious, her throat bruised in the shape of a handprint. Kira woke, disoriented, shards of the killer's mind bleeding into her own. She could feel Aeren studying her through the connection, testing the fragile limits of her mind, pulling at her unstable power like a musician plucking strings. It was a predator, patient, methodical, and terrifyingly intelligent. Each seizure, each vision, each glimpse into the killer's mind left her body more broken, her nerves fraying, her reality twisting into jagged fragments. And yet, she couldn't stop. She had to continue. The city's blood-soaked streets demanded it, demanded that someone sane or nearly so, see what had been done. Even if her own mind and body rebelled violently, even if Aeren's shadow lingered just beyond perception, testing, probing, waiting for her to falter. She was caught in the threads, the psychic loops, the fractured, unpredictable gift that left her at once powerful and helpless. She leaned against the wall, breath shuddering, tears streaking down her face, listening to the faint hum of electricity through the pipes. Somewhere inside the killer's mind, and now somewhere inside her own, Aeren waited, patient, sharp, and aware. She knew that it would not leave. Not yet. Not until it had decided whether she would break or bend, whether she would succumb or survive. And the thought made her shiver to the bone. The city was wet and dark, rain streaking the windows of the precinct as Detective Rains and Kira Vance returned to another crime scene. Each murder had been more brutal than the last, but tonight there was an intensity in the air that made her skin crawl. The victim had been found in a derelict warehouse, hands clenched around a silver dollar stamped 1950, driven into the chest with the kind of precision that made her stomach twist. The polish glinted under the harsh floodlights, the chemical sheen catching the rain like blood on glass. Kira's eyes flickered as the psychic hum buzzed faintly in her skull, threatening to erupt. Rains tried to guide her gently. "Take it slow," he said. "We need you conscious. We need you." But his words were swallowed by the hum, the vibrations threading through the building's walls, the wet metal of the doors, and the puddled concrete floors. Kira pressed her hands to her temples, trying to stabilize herself. Sometimes her gift surged, violently, unpredictably. Sometimes it failed entirely, leaving her blind, deaf, and terrified in the psychic void. Tonight, it chose neither extreme. It teased her, fragments of images sparking in her mind, tantalizing, incomplete. She stepped closer to the body, knees trembling. She could feel the residual fear of the victim, the shock lingering like a sticky fog over the warehouse floor. And yet, there was something else now. A presence, patient and deliberate, threading itself through the killer's memories, and, somehow, through her own unstable psychic conduit. Aeren was there. She could feel it in the back of her mind, probing, observing, amused by her fragile state. Her vision flared without warning. She was no longer in the warehouse. She was inside the killer's mind, but not alone. Aeren was there, cold and massive, a shadow that lurked just behind the killer's consciousness, whispering, guiding, controlling. "You see what I see," it said, its voice like gravel sliding over bone. "Do you feel the edges of my patience, the perfection of my method?" Kira gasped, trembling as she felt the duality of perspective, the victim's terror, sharp and immediate, and the killer's deliberate, precise movements. She could feel herself standing over the body, hands moving with a cold mechanical perfection she did not control. Chemical burns tingled across her fingers, though nothing physical touched her skin. Her ribs ached, mirroring the force of the knife's penetration, her legs quivering with psychosomatic pain, as if she were experiencing every wound firsthand. When she came back, she was on the cold warehouse floor, gasping for breath. Rains knelt beside her immediately, his hands hovering, unsure whether to touch or wait. "Kira? Again?" he asked, voice shaking. She nodded faintly, swallowing the bile rising in her throat. "It's worse," she whispered. "It's not just the killer anymore. Something else. Something is in there with him. And it's looking at me." The presence she had glimpsed was no longer confined to visions. In every reflective surface, mirrors, darkened windows, phone screens, she saw fragments of it. A shadow behind the killer, human-shaped but grotesquely wrong. Its awareness pressed at her, probing the weak points of her mind, finding the gaps left by her inconsistent psychic ability. The gift that had been half reliable before now served as a conduit for Aeren itself, unpredictable and violent, leaving her exposed in ways she could neither anticipate nor defend. The next few days were a haze of seizures, visions, and escalating terror. The murders continued, each scene more deliberate, more grotesque. In one alley, a victim had been nailed to a wall, coins from 1950 positioned meticulously over their eyes. The precision of the act made her stomach churn. Every time she tried to block her gift, to push away the visions, Aeren found a way through. It wasn't subtle. It was relentless, forcing her to see, to feel, to endure the dual horror of being both victim and killer simultaneously. Rains noticed disturbing changes. Kira's hands shook constantly, her eyes flickered with unnatural blackness during seizures, and she seemed to lose time in bursts too long to ignore. Once she woke to find dirt under her nails, the unmistakable shape of a bruise pressed around her throat, as though someone or something had tested the limits of her body while she had been unconscious. She couldn't explain it, no one could. But she could feel Aeren inside her, patient, amused, methodical, testing her fragile psyche and the inconsistencies of her psychic power. One night, in her apartment, the connection deepened. She had been trying to sleep, eyes pressed tightly against the pillow, muscles coiled and trembling, but the hum of electricity through the building reached her subconscious. Her gift surged violently without warning, dragging her into the killer's consciousness with Aeren present like a shadow clinging to her every thought. She could feel herself standing over the body again, hands moving with unnatural precision, placing coins, carving, arranging. Then she felt the victim's terror, a visceral, burning sensation in her chest, and the physical backlash hit her like a hammer. She convulsed in bed, arms thrashing, vision flickering. When she regained awareness, the apartment was silent, too silent. Dirt was under her fingernails, her throat sore with the impression of a handprint she had not felt applied. Her body had moved without consent, guided by the presence she had glimpsed in every reflection, every shard of psychic feedback. She understood then that the connection had become two-way. Aeren wasn't just observing through her, it was interacting, subtly shaping her body, her actions, her responses. Rains found her trembling in the living room, staring at her reflection in the darkened television screen. "Kira, it's okay. You're safe. You're here," he said softly, though the fear in his voice betrayed him. She didn't respond immediately, her eyes fixed on the shadow that lingered in the glass. She could feel it, patient and intelligent, testing her limits, probing for weaknesses in both her mind and her unstable gift. The next murder reinforced her terror. A man was found in an abandoned subway tunnel, coins from 1950 again, positioned with surgical perfection. Kira tried to block her gift, to shield herself from the incoming psychic feedback, but Aeren forced her inside the scene. She experienced the dual horror of the victim's suffocating panic and the killer's mechanical detachment simultaneously. Every movement, every breath of the killer was magnified in her body. She shivered, a phantom weight pressed against her chest, fingers ached as though she had handled the murder tools herself. She collapsed afterward, body quaking violently, vision flickering, pulse racing. Rains held her, whispering reassurances that felt hollow even as he said them. "It's happening again. Every time it's worse," she whispered, voice barely audible. "Aeren, it's inside my head, watching, testing. I can't stop it. And sometimes my gift doesn't even work. I'm blind. I'm trapped." The realization cut deep. She understood fully now that her gift, unstable, unpredictable, violent, was both a blessing and a curse. When it surged, she could see the unthinkable, understand the killer's mind, anticipate moves, feel terror and methodical precision simultaneously. But when it failed, she was defenseless, exposed to Aeren's probing, left a vulnerable conduit for something intelligent, patient, and malevolent. Every mirror, every screen, every polished surface became a reminder of the connection. A shadow lingered behind the killer, human-shaped but wrong, and Kira could feel it threading into her mind, testing her, wearing down the barriers she had built to protect herself. The murders would not stop, the sequence of coins continued, and she understood the horrifying truth. Aeren was using her. Every seizure, every vision, every breakdown brought it closer, deepening the connection, testing her resilience, and preparing the ground for something far worse. Kira leaned against the wall, breath ragged, hands trembling. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, scanned the apartment, the precinct, the city itself, knowing that every reflective surface could betray her. The duality of the gift, sometimes surging, sometimes failing, made her powerless in ways she could neither predict nor control. Aeren was patient, and patience was a predator. It did not need to strike now. It would wait, observe, erode her will slowly, methodically, like water wearing down stone. Detective Rain stayed close, watching, anxious and uncertain. He had never seen anything like this. He had seen Kira convulse, seize, collapse, and yet rise again, refusing to yield to the psychic onslaught. And yet even he could sense the invisible pressure, the malevolent awareness lingering just beyond sight, pressing into every shadow, testing the boundaries of Kira's unstable gift. Kira closed her eyes, trying to gather herself, breathing slowly, counting in and out, willing herself to be present in the moment. She understood, with grim clarity, that nothing would be the same again. The murders, the coins, the escalating brutality, and the two-way psychic connection with Aeren meant that she was no longer just a witness, she was part of the cycle. And the moment she faltered, the moment her unstable gift failed, Aeren would exploit it fully, and she would lose more than just control over her visions. The city continued to pulse around her, rain washing streets, sirens wailing, lights flickering. She knew the killer would strike again, and she knew that Aeren would be watching, always, every moment, every heartbeat. And somewhere deep in her mind, fragile and splintered, she felt the first threads of fear twist into something darker. A realization that the predator inside the psychic conduit was no longer distant, but intimately woven into her own unstable power. The apartment was a tomb of her own mind. Kira Vance stumbled through the narrow, dimly lit rooms, the air thick with the smell of old paper, polished chemicals, and faint iron from dried blood. Her eyes scanned the space, taking in every detail, yet nothing made sense. Maps were tacked to the walls in chaotic spirals, crime scene photographs hung in irregular clusters, and small jars of silver polish were scattered across tables, shelves, and counters. Each container gleamed unnaturally in the dim light, catching her eye, drawing her attention like a predator to prey. She did not remember collecting any of it. She did not remember even touching it. And yet it was here, in her apartment, a shrine to the killer's obsession, or maybe to Aeren's. Her gaze fell upon her laundry hamper. A blood-stained shirt peeked from the heap of dirty clothing. With a trembling hand she lifted it, and the psychic residue hit her like a hammer. It was her own hands, she realized, but not entirely. The memory of gripping the knife, of cutting, carving, and arranging, flooded her senses in a violent wave. She could feel the victim's panic, the knife's weight, the tension in the muscles that were not fully hers. Her body jerked involuntarily, as if she had lived the act in its entirety, and for a terrifying moment, she could not distinguish her own will from the echoes of the past. The voice came softly, seductively, inside her mind, threading through her thoughts. "You are tired," it said. Smooth, reasoned, yet oppressive. "You suffer because you resist. Stop. Let me share with you. Let me guide you. I can make this painless. Perfect." Kira's eyes widened. The voice was not a hallucination. It was Aeren, but not distant, not veiled behind psychic echoes. It was directly inside her waking mind, sitting like a weight on her skull, threading itself through every synapse. It spoke of control, of peace, of an end to the seizures and the terror. "You could have mastery," it whispered. "No more convulsions, no more visions you cannot endure. I can stabilize you if you allow it." Her chest heaved, mind fraying at the edges. Control, the promise of control, was almost intoxicating. For a brief moment she imagined it, her gift fully stabilized, her vision sharp and reliable, every detail of the killer's mind accessible without the violent physical cost. She imagined never waking up trembling, never seeing flashes of death that left her body convulsing. Relief seemed to hover just beyond the edges of her consciousness. But the gift, unstable as ever, surged violently without warning. Her vision blurred, flickering between her apartment and the remnants of the killer's mind. The dual perspectives slammed into her simultaneously. The raw, agonized terror of the victims and the meticulous, clinical detachment of the killer. Her body shuddered, spasms racking her limbs, her fingers curling into painful knots. Her vision tore into fragments, snapping between reality and memory, leaving her gasping for breath in the liminal space between. Kira blacked out. When she came to, the apartment was different, or perhaps it was she who had shifted. Shadows lay in unnatural places, crawling along walls in subtle, impossible ways. The jars of polish gleamed brighter, and the maps on the walls seemed to pulse faintly, like veins under her skin. She stumbled to the bathroom, splashing cold water onto her face. Her reflection wavered, eyes wide and dark, pupils dilated, as if the mirror was trying to warn her of something she did not yet understand. Aeren spoke again, this time gently, coaxing, patient. "I am not the enemy, Kira. I am the path. Let me complete you. Let me guide you, and you will be whole. Your gift will no longer betray you. You will never fall like this again." She pressed her forehead to the cool porcelain of the sink, shivering. She could feel the predator inside her mind, threading through the unstable psychic conduit, probing, testing, patient. Every seizure, every misfire of her ability, every blackout became a teaching moment for it. Aeren learned, adapted, tightened its influence, a malevolent intelligence entwined with the very essence of her power. Days passed in a blur of seizures and intermittent clarity. Each blackout became more violent, lasting longer, leaving her waking in unfamiliar rooms, on unfamiliar floors, sometimes on the street, sometimes on the floor of her own apartment. Objects she did not remember moving were shifted. Maps, photographs, jars, everything was reorganized, arranged as if by invisible hands. Sometimes her hands were blistered or cut from unseen contact with chemical polish. Sometimes her clothes bore traces of blood she could not explain. Her dreams were no refuge. They were invaded by the vivid, jarring duality of the killer's mind, threaded with Aeren's presence. In dreams, she relived each murder from both perspectives, sometimes feeling the blade pierce her own flesh, sometimes experiencing the victim's panic as if it were her own body that was being violated. Each awakening brought more pain, more physical resonance from events she had only witnessed psychically, and each time, Aeren's voice lingered in her thoughts, soft, persuasive, unrelenting. By the third day, Kira noticed subtle changes in her body. Her hands trembled even when she tried to rest. Faint bruises appeared along her forearms, as if invisible fingers had tested her strength. She caught glimpses of shadows in the corner of her vision, fleeting but unmistakably aware, moving with a calculated, patient intelligence. She realized the presence was no longer bound to visions. It was learning to exist within her waking consciousness. Rains noticed her decline. He watched her pace the apartment, dragging maps from one wall to another, muttering to herself fragments of events she could not articulate. He saw her collapse mid-step, seizures racking her body, her eyes flashing black for a fraction of a second. "Kira," he said gently but with a tension that belied his words. "You have to tell me what's happening. What are you seeing?" I can't," she whispered, pressing her palms to her temples. "It's not just the visions anymore. It's inside me, always, watching, waiting." She found herself unable to avoid Aeren's subtle manipulations. Objects would shift overnight, cryptic arrangements of photos and polished jars hinting at patterns she did not fully understand. Her hands sometimes moved without consent, lifting, arranging, tracing patterns on walls. Each movement left psychic residue on her mind, reinforcing Aeren's presence, its awareness. She was becoming a conduit not only for visions but for the demon itself. The blood-stained shirt in her hamper became a symbol of the transformation. She could feel the memory of her hands gripping the knife, carving, arranging, reliving every second of violence. It was no longer confined to her visions. She could feel it while awake as if she had physically committed the act, her body obeying a foreign will. Each time she lifted the shirt, the psychic echo resonated more strongly, the duality of perspectives, a victim's panic, the killer's detached precision, hammering her nervous system. The promise of control, whispered from Aeren's voice, became nearly irresistible. "You could be whole," it said. Stop resisting, and you will have mastery. No more blackouts, no more convulsions, no more pain. She knew the price, though. Complete surrender would mean allowing Aeren to inhabit her fully, to share her body entirely. And yet, the pain of resisting, the constant psychic feedback, was nearly unbearable. By the end of the week, Kira's apartment was transformed into a warped reflection of the killer's mind. Every surface, every reflective window or screen, carried fragments of shadows, subtle reminders of Aeren's presence. Each night brought visions of murders she had not yet seen, crimes that would occur, showing her the killer's perfection and Aeren's patience. Her unstable gift was no longer just a tool. It was a conduit for something much older, much smarter, much more dangerous. Her body was fracturing under the strain. Blackouts lasted hours. Each seizure left new bruises, scratches, or burns, evidence of a mind-body connection that was no longer purely psychic. Rain stayed close, documenting, helping, terrified, but helpless to stop what was unfolding. He could see the terror in the exhaustion, the strain of her unstable power, but he could not reach into the psychic maelstrom that had become her reality. Kira sat in the dim light, trembling, jar in hand, the chemical sheen of silver polish reflecting in her wide, unblinking eyes. Aeren's voice whispered again, soft, persuasive, patient. You are ready. You could be mine. Complete, whole, perfect. No more chaos. No more suffering. She shivered, hearing the edge of temptation in the words, knowing the cost, knowing that surrender meant becoming the very thing she feared. And yet resisting felt almost impossible. Her body screamed with the memory of violence, her mind crackling with uncontrolled visions, her soul fraying at the edges of her unstable psychic conduit. The next morning the precinct was tense, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, flickering sporadically like nervous thoughts. Detective Rains stood at the edge of the tape surrounding the latest crime scene, a narrow alley not far from Kira's apartment. Rain had fallen overnight, turning the asphalt slick and reflective. A body lay twisted against the brick wall, eyes wide in terror, hands pinned rigidly to the chest where a single silver dollar, stamped 1955, was driven through with deliberate precision. Kira stood nearby, trembling, clutching her coat against her chest, trying to keep her breathing steady. The psychic hum in her head had begun early this morning, teasing her, threatening her, surging and retreating unpredictably. Sometimes it flared with full force, dragging her into visions she could barely survive. Other times it failed entirely, leaving her unable to see, to feel, trapped in her own helpless body while Aeren's presence brushed against her mind. She knew what she had to do, what she feared. She had to touch the body. Even the air around it vibrated with psychic residue, subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else but screaming to her unstable senses. As she approached, the flash of memory hit her violently, the dual perspective of victim and killer. The terror of the man in the alley, the cold, meticulous detachment of the killer, and threaded through it all, Aeren's shadow, guiding, watching, assessing her reaction. Her hands shook violently as she leaned over, fingers brushing the man's neck. A surge of energy shot through her arm, and she realized with a sickening dread. Her fingerprints were already embedded in the crime. She pulled back, horror flooding her. The body hadn't been disturbed by her hands yet. This was residual, psychic imprinting, the echo of Aeren's influence made real. Every nerve screamed as if she had pressed her fingers into flesh, left her mark in the same pattern the killer's hands would have. Rains noticed her sudden jerk, her skin blanching. "Kira, what is it?" he asked, urgency breaking into his voice. She shook her head, unable to speak. Her mind was splitting in two, the visions crashing into her consciousness, unrelenting, while Aeren's voice intruded, calm, almost tender. "Do you see now?" it whispered in her thoughts. "This was never about him. This was about you. The shell was a test. You are the host I've been waiting for. The conduit is yours to complete or to shatter. Only one can endure." She gasped, stumbling back from the alley, clutching her head as the visions intensified. The dual perspectives were unbearable. The panic of the victim, the meticulous joy of the killer, and beneath it all, Aeren's presence pressing, guiding, insinuating. Her unstable psychic power misfired again, surging violently and then cutting out entirely, leaving her blind, deaf, and shaking. The officers around her murmured in confusion, noticing the sudden, inexplicable reaction of someone who should have been merely observing. Her body jerked, eyes rolling back, pupils blackening like burned glass for a fraction of a second, as if something else had stepped into her physical form. The camera surveillance on nearby buildings captured a second of the impossible. Kira's frame distorted, stretched inhumanly, a shadow lingering around her, flickering with intent. When she collapsed into Rain's arms, it was as though she had been somewhere else entirely, somewhere dark and infinite. Aeren whispered again, a soft, persuasive drawl that invaded her waking mind. The shell was never the purpose. You are more capable, more unstable, more perfect for me. The gift is yours, Kira, but only if you allow me to merge. Stop resisting, and it will be painless. Control, clarity, and completion. You can be whole. Clarity and completion. Her body trembled, sweat beading along her forehead. She could feel every nerve ending vibrating from the psychic feedback, her heart racing with the dual horror of visions she could barely survive. Yet even in her terror, a strange, horrifying clarity emerged. Aeren had prepared everything, guided her steps, orchestrated events. The shell had failed only to prove her readiness. Detective Rains tried to anchor her. Kira, focus on me. Stay with me, you're not alone. He reached for her hands, but even his touch felt distant, as though the presence threading through her body pushed his grasp away, testing her resilience. Her hands flexed and tightened on their own. She could feel them move as though guided by something external, tracing lines in the rain-soaked alley, ghostly imprints of the killer's methodical movements. The coins in the man's chest glinted under the pale streetlights, reflecting the fractured light in jagged streaks, and she could see them not just as objects, but as nodes of psychic connection, threads weaving her mind into Aeren's pattern. A violent convulsion tore through her. She collapsed onto the wet asphalt, trembling uncontrollably, unable to distinguish the edges of herself from the threads of death surrounding her. Her vision flickered between alley and mindscape, and she felt herself standing over the body, laying coins, cutting, arranging, as if she were the killer. Then the perspective flipped violently. The man's panic, his screams, the heat of fear, the quick, suffocating terror of awareness of impending death. It hit her like a tidal wave, leaving her gasping, nausea overwhelming her. Somewhere in that chaotic storm she felt Aeren's satisfaction. Calm, patient, insidious. You understand, Kira. You are not just an observer. You are the conduit, the host, the one capable of perfection. When she awoke fully, she was in the hospital, restraints binding her arms and legs. Machines hummed, monitoring her heart, her brainwaves, her oxygen. Rain stood nearby, exasperated and terrified, watching every twitch, every flutter of eyelid. What did it do to you? He whispered, voice barely audible. It's always been waiting, Kira rasped, voice hoarse. The shell. That man. The test. It was never him. I'm the host. She shivered violently, eyes wide, pupils darting as if she could still see Aeren lurking just beyond the physical world. Her fingers twitched, leaving ghostly imprints in the air that seemed to echo the motions of the killer. The hospital staff flinched at her convulsions, unaware of the psychic tempest that tore through her mind. She could feel Aeren's presence pressing through the confines of her body, testing, waiting, exploring the edges of her fragile control. Every muscle, every nerve ending seemed to vibrate with anticipation and horror, her body a puppet for the unseen intelligence threading itself through her unstable psychic conduit. Her visions continued relentless. The sequence of murders, the coins, the precise brutality, all played back in her mind, overlapping, spiraling, feeding into her growing terror and understanding. Each murder she experienced physically left traces on her body. Bruises, scratches, phantom burns, ribs aching as though stabbed, hands blistered with invisible heat. The dual perspective, already unbearable, became a tool for Aeren, reinforcing its presence, solidifying its hold. And then came the realization that chilled her deeper than any vision. She was no longer a passive witness. Aeren had made her active, even when she fought it. Her fingerprints on the last victim were proof. Her body, unstable and fragile, had been used as a vessel. She had moved, touched, marked, even when she had not consciously chosen to. Her unstable gift, her half-gift, had made her susceptible, a conduit not just for visions but for a malevolent intelligence with its own agenda. She felt a dark, creeping sense of inevitability. Aeren's voice, soft and almost comforting, whispered through her mind again. You see now, Kira, the test is complete. You are the host. Your body, your gift, your instability. They were never obstacles. They were preparation. You are ready. Rains tried to reach her, to anchor her sanity, to remind her that she was still human, still herself. But Kira could feel the edges of her consciousness fraying, the predator threading through her unstable gift, slowly eroding the boundaries of herself. She shivered violently, realizing that the psychic conduit she had always feared being unstable was the very thing that made her perfect for the host Aeren needed. And in that moment, she understood with horrifying clarity. The murders, the coins, the escalating brutality, they were never random. They were a sequence, a preparation, a path that had led inexorably to her. Every seizure, every blackout, every moment of psychic failure had been orchestrated to shape her into the perfect conduit for something older, something patient, something endlessly hungry. The world outside continued, indifferent, rain washing the streets, sirens wailing, lights flickering. Inside the hospital room, Kira trembled in her restraints, eyes wide, pupils blackened for a brief instant, body twitching in ways beyond human control. And somewhere deep in her mind she felt Aeren patient and certain, a predator that had claimed her not through force, but through preparation, waiting for her to accept the inevitable. The night air clung to Kira's skin like a damp shroud as rains led her through back alleys, careful to avoid cameras, avoid witnesses, avoid detection. The precinct had been aware of her connection to the latest murders, but Rains could no longer ignore the reality he had seen firsthand. The visions, the seizures, the unexplainable psychic marks. She was more than connected. She was entangled, bound to something ancient, something patient, and something that had waited specifically for her. Kira stumbled, her legs unsteady, mind fraying at the edges. Each movement was a battle. Her body twitched involuntarily, and her hands sometimes moved against her will, tracing patterns she didn't understand, arranging invisible symbols in the air that left her feeling drained and violated. Her eyes flickered from reality to memory with a violent inconsistency. One moment she could see the alley in sharp detail, the next she was pulled into a vision of the killer's previous acts, seeing the terror of the victims, the precise motions of the knife, the cold, deliberate efficiency of Aeren guiding it all. Rains held her arm, steadying her, whispering reassurances, but even he could not compete with the constant intrusions. He had come to understand that her gift, or her curse, was unreliable. Sometimes she could access the visions with startling clarity, other times they vanished entirely, leaving her blind to the threads that bound her to the killer. Each blackout terrified him, because he knew what she could see when her eyes were open. He had glimpsed the edges of it, the fragments of Aeren's shadow threading through her unstable conduit, and it had been enough to convince him that she was the only one who could stop what was coming. The abandoned house of the coin killer loomed ahead, hidden behind overgrown hedges and rusting gates. It was a place frozen in time, untouched since the killer had vanished from the public eye. Rains hesitated before pushing the creaking gate open, but Kira surged forward, drawn by the psychic resonance that vibrated through her unstable gift. Her visions sparked to life, not full and controlled, but jagged and intense, guiding her through the darkness, pulling her closer to the source. Inside, the house was a shrine to methodical obsession. The workshop at the back of the property was lined with shelves holding hundreds of silver dollars, each meticulously ordered by year, each jar of polish arranged with obsessive care. Chemical vats filled the room with a faint, acrid scent that made the air shimmer. The walls were a canvas of horrors, plaster burned with symbols, binding sigils, summoning marks, written in a dark, almost coagulated blood that seemed to pulse faintly under Kira's gaze. She reached out to touch one of the sigils, and the moment her fingertips brushed the burned surface, her unstable psychic conduit erupted. Her vision was shattered, raw, all-consuming. She was pulled into the past, into the moment the killer had first become Aeren's vessel. Lightning arced across a storm-laden sky, electricity splintering through the air, and Kira saw the demon leap, slipping through the energy, entering the killer's body with a patient, intelligent hunger. Killer's human will was not destroyed. It was refined, reshaped, guided into a precise instrument. Kira's body shook, her hands gripping the plaster tightly, her pulse hammering as the weight of what she was seeing threatened to crush her unstable mind. Aeren's voice threaded through her consciousness then, soft, persuasive, patient. "Do you understand now, Kira? This is not about killing for pleasure, this is about refinement. Each host, each vessel, each act of blood and polish is a lesson. The conduit must be perfected, and now it is your turn." Kira staggered back from the wall, her vision flickering between the vivid past and the present room. Her hands trembled, leaving ghostly psychic imprints on the surfaces she touched, faint residual echoes of her unstable gift. Rains was at her side immediately, steadying her. "You okay?" he asked, voice tight with fear. She nodded weakly, though her body was shaking violently, her limbs twitching, her chest heaving. They moved cautiously through the rest of the house, the air thick with the remnants of the killer's obsessive practices. Jars of polish caught her eye, each one a different hue, chemically altered, reflecting light in strange, unnatural ways. She felt Aeren watching through her conduit, its presence weaving into her perception of the room, showing her details she could not have known otherwise. The chemical composition of the polish, the way the coins were arranged to mark time, the precise way the killer had orchestrated each murder to refine himself and the demon simultaneously. Kira felt a nauseating clarity. Aeren did not act out of bloodlust. Each killing was not random, not for amusement. It was refinement. The vessels it claimed were carefully chosen, each act of death a lesson in precision, control, and patience. And now, with her unstable gift, it was preparing her. Each seizure, each misfire of her ability, each blackout had been a part of the training, testing her capacity to endure, to resist, and to merge. Hours passed as they explored, the storm outside growing violent, lightning flashing across the sky, thunder rolling in deep, jagged rumbles that shook the house. Kira's unstable vision surged and receded unpredictably. Sometimes she could see the sequence of murders, the victim's panic, the meticulous carving and polishing. Sometimes her gift failed entirely, leaving her only aware of the physical sensations, the tremors in her hands, the pounding of her heart, the ache of exhaustion that had no physical cause. Rains tried to ground her. "Kira, focus on my voice. Stay here with me. Don't let it pull you too far." But even his voice could not penetrate fully. Aeren was patient, threading through her mind, pressing into the gaps where her gift was unstable, filling in the blanks with its presence, guiding her awareness, refining her understanding of what it had done and what it required from her. By the end of the night, Kira was exhausted, shaking and trembling on the floor of the workshop. Yet she understood with terrifying clarity what was happening. Aeren was no longer bound to a shell. It had discarded the previous host, preparing fully for her. Each vision, each seizure, each unstable moment had led inexorably to this house, to these jars of polish, to the symbols burned in blood, to the understanding that she was the final vessel. Her body twitched again, uncontrollable, and she felt a thread of awareness leave her own consciousness, reaching outward, merging with the lingering psychic echoes of the coin killer. She saw through his eyes, felt his movements, understood the precision, the ritual, the obsession. And yet, beneath that, she felt Aeren's presence weaving through, patient, intelligent, assessing her readiness, waiting for the moment she could no longer resist without breaking entirely. Rains knelt beside her, voice low but urgent. "We need to get out of here. Can you walk?" She nodded weakly, though her legs quivered beneath her. He helped her to her feet, guiding her through the storm outside, the house looming behind them like a dark, living thing, full of secrets she would never forget. Each step away felt like leaving a part of herself behind. Yet she knew that part was no longer hers alone. It belonged to Aeren as well. And in the back of her mind, as she stumbled through the rain, she felt the first true merging of their consciousnesses. The unstable conduit that had defined her life, that had brought her to the edge of collapse countless times, was now a bridge. Aeren's presence flowed through it, and for the first time, she felt what it meant to be both herself and something far older, far more dangerous, inhabiting the same fragile vessel. The storm raged on as they disappeared into the city streets, leaving the abandoned house and its secrets behind. But Kira knew it would never leave her. Aeren had claimed her in ways that could not be reversed. Every heartbeat, every tremor, every flicker of her unstable gift was a reminder that she was no longer just a witness. She was now the conduit, the vessel, the host. And the line between self and demon had begun to blur irrevocably. The city seemed to hold its breath that night, the streets slick with rain and the distant wail of sirens cutting through the low hum of tension. Kira followed Rains cautiously, each step measured, each motion weighted by the exhaustion and psychic strain that had become constant companions. Her unstable gift flickered and stuttered as it always did, sometimes flooding her senses with unbearable clarity, sometimes leaving her blind to the threads of death and refinement that Aeren had been threading through her consciousness. She knew the pattern now, understood the sequence of the coins, the years, the meticulous precision. But the final link, the 1975 coin, loomed ahead like a dark promise. They arrived at the latest crime scene. A small, abandoned apartment building near the edge of the industrial district. The building smelled of mold, damp concrete, and decay, but Kira barely noticed. Her focus was entirely on the room ahead, the psychic resonance vibrating violently through her unstable conduit. The victim lay on a threadbare mattress in the corner of the room, hands pinned to the chest by a perfectly polished silver dollar stamped 1975. The wounds were precise, surgical, echoing the pattern she had traced through every previous murder. Kira's hands trembled as she approached. Her unstable gift surged, pulling her into the vision before she could stop it. The perspective of the killer and the victim collided violently in her mind, a tornado of sensation she could not control. She felt the cold, methodical joy of the killer's hands arranging the coins, the terror and panic of the victim as awareness of death crept closer. And threading through both, Aeren's patient, insidious presence, guiding her perception, testing her limits. She tried to resist, tried to anchor herself to reality, but Aeren pushed harder, a relentless force pressing through the gaps in her unstable conduit. The demon was no longer content to wait, no longer content to test her. It was forcing the merger, blending her identity with the echoes of the killer, pushing her to experience both perspectives simultaneously, with brutal intensity. Her body convulsed violently, sweat and rain mixing on her skin, as she felt herself carving the coins into flesh, then lying there as the victim, dying, the sensations indistinguishable from reality. Rains called her name, voice sharp, insistent, trying to pull her back. "Kira, look at me. Stay with me." But his voice was a threat against the hurricane in her mind. Her unstable gift flared again, surging unpredictably, leaving her blind, then plunging her into the merged perspective with merciless clarity. She could feel Aeren guiding the motions, the perfect precision, the ritualistic obsession, and she realized with a horror that was almost tangible. She was no longer just a conduit. She was participating. Even her attempts at resistance were co-opted, her body moving as if of its own accord, following the will of a mind far older and far more patient than her own. The mirrors in the room reflected the terror back at her. Or so she thought at first. Her reflection did not blink, did not react to her movements. It watched her with the calm, predatory patience of Aeren itself. The image was wrong, impossibly still, a perfect echo of the demon's form threading through her unstable gift. Kira staggered back from the mirror, hands pressed against her temples, trying to anchor herself, to separate her identity from the one pressing into her from all sides. Her body betrayed her. Foam began to seep from her mouth, her lips trembling uncontrollably, eyes rolling as the psychic feedback fused her perceptions. Rains tried to hold her, to steady her, but even his arms could not contain the violent energy coursing through her. Every nerve ending seemed to vibrate with the presence of the demon, every muscle responding to impulses she could not control. Somewhere inside, the lines between self and Aeren were dissolving, fusing, leaving her both participant and witness to a sequence of violence that defied comprehension. The floor beneath her seemed to melt and twist, the runes shifting in perception between reality and the psychic landscape Aeren had created. Walls bled, lights flickered, the coins on the chest of the victim glinting unnaturally, reflecting the fractured reality of her visions. Each coin became a node, a conduit for Aeren's influence, threading through her unstable gift, binding her mind to the ritualistic pattern that had consumed the killer before her. She screamed, a sound that tore from deep within, echoing both her own terror and the cold satisfaction of the killer's perspective. Her hands moved independently, tracing the motions she had experienced in the vision, arranging coins, pressing, marking, carving with the precision of someone trained beyond mortal skill. The merging was complete, and yet incomplete. Aeren was patient, always patient, waiting for her to succumb fully, testing her limits, refining her as it had refined every host before. Rains shouted again, desperate, trying to pull her back to the physical world. "Kira, fight it now." But she could barely hear him through the roar in her head. Her unstable gift misfired again, surging violently, leaving her blind to the alley, the building, the victim, then crashing her into the merged perspective once more. Pain exploded through her body, ribs aching as if stabbed, hands blistered from phantom burns, the rhythm of her heart, a drum of terror and anticipation. Somewhere in the chaos, Aeren whispered, a soft, almost gentle voice threading through her collapsing consciousness. "You understand now. The loop is complete. The refinement ends. You are the conduit perfected. And yet..." The voice trailed, patient, calculating. There is always more to learn, always more to endure. The realization hit her with staggering clarity. The loop of coins, the escalating brutality, the deliberate sequence. It had all been a countdown, a test, a refinement. And now, with the final coin in place, Aeren no longer needed the previous shell. It was preparing her, molding her, fusing her identity with the fragments of every act, every murder, every motion she had witnessed and, terrifyingly, participated in. Rains was at her side, trying to keep her conscious, speaking her name, his voice tethering her to the mortal world. But even as she struggled, she felt the wires of perception fusing inside her mind, the dual perspectives of killer and victim, her unstable gift, and Aeren's patient, intelligent will converging into a single, terrifying continuity. She felt herself collapsing inward, the psychic pressure unbearable, every heartbeat a drum of terror, every breath a battle against the force threading through her fragile vessel. When she fell, foaming blood and static erupting from her mouth, Rains caught her, supporting her weight, but she was slipping beyond him, beyond the physical, into the full psychic merging that Aeren had orchestrated. Her unstable gift, always inconsistent, had now become a bridge, allowing the demon to thread its presence fully through her consciousness, forcing her to experience every facet of the final act. She felt herself both laying the coins into flesh, and being the victim of those very motions, the agony and the precision entwined, indistinguishable, impossible to separate. She looked in the cracked mirror of the apartment room, eyes wide, pupils blackened briefly, and saw herself reflected not as herself, but as something else, something threaded through with Aeren's presence. Her reflection did not blink, did not acknowledge her movements. It watched, calm, patient, knowing. And in that moment, she understood fully the extent of the danger. She could not survive this merging unscathed. The unstable conduit that had defined her life had now become a vessel, one that could be controlled, exploited, or destroyed by a mind infinitely patient and far older than her own. Rain's voice, sharp and urgent, pierced the psychic storm. "Stay with me, Kira. Don't let it take you." He held her close, trying to anchor her to the physical, but she felt the first true fracture in the boundary between herself and Aeren. Every sensation, every movement, every thought was shared, interwoven, the lines of identity blurring as the final act of the loop completed itself. And then it happened, the psychic collapse, violent and total. The room seemed to shatter, lights exploding overhead, shadows twisting unnaturally across walls. Kira convulsed violently, foam and blood at her mouth, her body responding to impulses that were no longer entirely her own. Aeren pressed through, not cruelly, not violently, but patiently, shaping, testing, refining, merging. And yet, somewhere deep in her consciousness, she clung to the core of herself, the human part that had refused to submit fully, that had resisted the inevitability, even for a moment. When the collapse ended, the apartment was silent. Rain dripped through broken windows, the room a chaotic mix of physical debris and psychic residue. Kira lay in Rain's arms, trembling, exhausted beyond comprehension, foaming blood drying along her lips. Her eyes, when they opened fully, flickered between human and something else, the unstable conduit threaded now irreversibly with Aeren's presence. She had survived, but only barely. And in the silence that followed, she understood the truth. The loop of blood had ended, the coins had completed their sequence, but she was forever changed. Somewhere inside her mind, the wires of perception had fused completely. She was no longer simply an observer, no longer merely a conduit. She was the host. And Aeren, patient, intelligent, ancient, waited quietly, threaded through her unstable gift, ready for the next test. The hospital room was a cage. Fluorescent lights hummed with a sterile intensity, each flicker making Kira wince. She lay strapped to the bed, her wrists and ankles tethered to cold metal rails, heavy sedation coursing through her veins. Tubes ran into her arms and chest, monitors beeped in irregular rhythms, and the faint metallic tang of antiseptic hung thick in the air. But the world outside the hospital was irrelevant. The real battlefield existed inside her mind. Static whispered from the monitors, a low, electric hiss that crawled into her ears, into her skull. She could feel it through her bones, the vibrations threading through her nerves like tiny, needle-sharp fingers. Aeren had learned how to bend the machinery, to bleed through the circuits, to speak and manipulate through the very tools meant to sustain her. Her unstable psychic gift flared violently, oscillating between hyperclear perception and total sensory blackout, making each moment unpredictable, uncontrollable. Sometimes she could see the threads of the past murders like glowing filaments suspended in air. Other times the world went black, her mind plunging into darkness, leaving her alone with Aeren's voice. Rains hovered near her bedside, eyes bloodshot, expression tight with terror and desperation. He tried to speak over the static, calling her name, offering tethers to reality. "Kira, don't let it take you. Listen to me." But his words were faint, swallowed by the buzzing and tearing inside her skull. She wanted to answer, to reach for him, but the connection was tenuous, fragile, and Aeren was pressing through the gaps, guiding her focus elsewhere. Her body began to convulse. The first spasm made the bed rails clang against the floor. Nurses rushed in, shouting, trying to intervene, but every step into the room made the air itself shiver. Lights overhead flared, flickering, shadows crawling across walls in patterns that made no sense. Monitors flashed erratically, graphs bending and writhing like living things. Aeren's presence was everywhere at once, a patient, malignant intelligence that no longer needed the coin killer's body to manifest its will. The demon's whispers threaded through every electronic pulse, every hum and flicker, and into Kira's unstable conduit. She began to see the victims not as ghosts or memories, but as fully alive sensations. The cold steel of the knife, the polishing of coins, the heat of blood on skin, the terror in wide eyes. Her body reacted with precision. Spasms mirrored the wounds. Ribs ached as though stabbed, lungs burned as though filled with smoke. Her heart staggered like a wounded animal. Each monitor's static vibrated in time with her heartbeat, each flicker aligning with the rhythm of her seizures. Rains tried to hold her down, tried to speak her back to herself, but even his touch was distorted through the psychic haze. For a moment, her eyes opened, blackened at the edges like charred glass, and she focused on him. His face split into hundreds of tiny reflections, each echoing fear, desperation, and disbelief. She realized with terror that Aeren was observing him through her, threading its perception into hers, watching her struggle like a scientist observing a test subject. The room itself became unsteady, the walls bending, pulsing. Kira could see the hospital ceiling fracture in her mind, the fluorescent panels melting into bone and shadows, wires sprouting like veins, carrying currents of electricity thick and red, leaking into the air like blood. She felt herself hovering between planes of reality, tethered only by the mechanical instruments of the hospital, and the faint, fragile voice of Rains calling her back. Her unstable psychic gift surged, a wave that threw her consciousness into the full memory of the coin killer's last acts. She was both victim and perpetrator, sensation and thought intertwined in a violent feedback loop. Aeren whispered soft, coaxing words. "You are ready. We are perfect together. Let go." The voice was seductive, promising an end to the pain, the seizures, the unstable visions, if she would just surrender. But Kira, despite the agony tearing through every fiber of her body, knew the price of submission. To yield would mean the permanent loss of self, the complete erasure of humanity. The demon pushed harder, forcing her to see the final murder in excruciating detail. She felt the polish of the coin under her fingers, the way the metal pressed cold and precise against flesh, the way the knife entered in a sequence she knew from memory, down to the exact angle and depth. The victim's fear and shock slammed into her as though she were experiencing it herself, and for a heartbeat, she believed she could die from the intensity. Her lungs burned, spasmed, a hollow scream left her throat that sounded wrong even to her own ears. Rain screamed over the chaos. "Kira, fight it now, you're stronger than this." His voice was a lifeline, the fragile anchor tethering her to the human world. Somewhere in the storm of Aeren's invasion, her mind clung to his voice, the rational edge that remained, the core of herself she refused to lose. She clawed at the threads of the psychic onslaught, tearing at the merging perspectives, struggling to separate her identity from the violent memories, from the demon's patient whispering. The room shifted violently as she fought. Monitors shorted, alarms screamed, and a flickering light cast everything in a red and violet hue. Electrical arcs danced across the walls, igniting papers, cables and panels in sudden bursts. Each surge of power sent ripples through her unstable conduit, amplifying the visions, making the experience almost unbearable. Yet in the midst of the chaos, Kira found a strange clarity. Aeren's presence was strongest when she allowed herself to be fully merged with the memories, fully present in the victim-killer duality. If she could channel that energy without giving in, she could isolate Aeren from the host remnants of the coin killer, severing the tie without surrendering herself. She focused, every ounce of attention zeroed in on the psychic core where Aeren lingered. The demon's whispers became a hiss of static and glass-shattering sound, threading through her own thoughts. She felt herself splitting her consciousness, pushing outward into the fractured mind space of the coin killer, where Aeren had nested. The hospital world collapsed around her. Lights exploded, tubes rattled, monitors flickered erratically, alarms wailed. Blood from past visions, memory, reality, and psychic projection poured over the walls of her mind, dripping into herself in a way that made every nerve scream. Rains caught her as she collapsed, supporting her trembling form. "Stay with me, Kira. Don't let it take you." But she barely heard him. Her consciousness had already launched into the fractured mind, the battlefield where the demon's presence and the killer's remnants entwined. Her unstable gift, always unreliable, became the perfect instrument for precision destruction inside the psychic landscape. Every flash of pain, every seizure, every foaming breath was mirrored inside her mind, driving her closer to the point where she could sever the demon's tether completely. The ambient noise of the hospital, the static, the monitors, the alarms, the hum of fluorescent lights, was all co-opted by Aeren. Its voice seeped into every corner, promising perfection, release, the end of suffering. "You belong to me, you will surrender, and it will be over," it said, patient, persuasive. But Kira ignored it. She drove herself deeper into the psychic network of the coin killer, tearing apart every memory, every fragment of personality, every construct Aeren had used as a foothold. Pain exploded in her chest, searing, ripping, nerve endings igniting in feedback. And yet she persisted. Each shred of the host's mind destroyed weakened Aeren, pushed it out of the physical conduit, away from the unstable psychic link, while the demon's presence in the hospital's machinery grew more desperate, more violent. Sparks arced from the monitors, shadows crawled unnaturally along the ceiling, and static poured like a river from every speaker and wire. The room had become a storm, a tempest of psychic violence made manifest in the physical world. Finally, as she reached the core of the coin killer's fractured mind, Aeren's influence faltered. The demon's whispers became frantic, splintered, trailing off into broken fragments of sound. Kira could feel the psychic tether snapping, the unstable conduit shuddering violently as the last piece of the killer's consciousness dissolved into nothingness. Pain tore through her body in a final crescendo, a mix of memory, feedback, and neurological collapse, leaving her gasping and convulsing. Rains tightened his grip on her, feeling her body go slack, heart hammering in terror as the monitors went haywire. Lights exploded, machines shorted, and the hospital room seemed to bend and twist as if reality itself was breaking under the psychic backlash. Kira's eyes fluttered, blackened, then rolled back in her head, her body trembling, foaming at the mouth, every organ straining under the psychic pressure. She had expelled Aeren from the coin killer's remnants, severing the tether, but at an unimaginable cost. And in the midst of the chaos, one monitor, one small insignificant screen, flickered faintly. Static danced across it, forming a whisper, almost imperceptible. Her name. A reminder that the battle, though seemingly won, was far from over. The unstable conduit that was Kira had survived, but the war within her mind had left permanent scars, threads of Aeren lingering like embers in ash. Rains looked on, helpless, as the machinery around him melted down, lights exploding and the room collapsing in sensory horror. Kira's body lay in his arms, still, trembling and exhausted beyond comprehension. She had fought the demon and destroyed its foothold, but the cost was total. She was alive only in the sense that her mind and body still clung to existence, and even then, the faint static whispering her name promised that the nightmare was not yet over. The room had ceased to feel like a hospital. The walls bent and pulsed in the flickering light, machines convulsed, and the static-filled hum of the monitors became a low roar. Kira's body lay strapped to the bed, convulsing in response to every psychic shockwave she sent through herself. Yet her mind was already elsewhere, deep inside the fractured remnants of the coin killer's consciousness, the place where Aeren had nested, waited, and perfected its cruelty. Every sensory feedback from the physical world was magnified in her mind, turning pain into kaleidoscopic agony, every sound into a jagged knife across her skull. She was weightless and infinite, stretching into a space made of blood and broken mirrors, the past murders looping endlessly, victims screaming, killers laughing, coins flashing in their polished perfection. Aeren appeared in the psychic landscape not as a shadow this time, but as a towering silhouette of glass, steel, and shadow, a form that seemed almost solid yet impossibly fragile. Its presence filled every corner of this nightmarish world, whispering in tones that vibrated in her bones. All you have to do is let go. Join me. Be perfect. You cannot resist forever. Kira's unstable psychic gift surged unpredictably. Sometimes she could feel herself tearing through the killer's fractured memories with absolute precision. Sometimes she plunged into total sensory blackout, lost in an endless void of soundless screams and freezing, pulsating darkness. She clutched at the fragments of herself that remained tethered to the real world, the sound of rain shouting her name, the faint scent of antiseptic, the weight of her own body struggling against the restraints. They were threads, fragile but vital. The first memory she attacked was the oldest, the victim whose eyes were covered with a silver dollar dated 1940. She plunged into the body of the killer as he raised the knife, and simultaneously into the victim as she felt the cold steel pierce flesh. Pain exploded in her nervous system, mirrored perfectly in the convulsions racking her body. Rains tried to intervene, but every touch seemed to amplify the psychic feedback. She was both inside and outside the event, experiencing it with terrifying simultaneity. Aeren's voice hummed in the background, threading itself through her thoughts, trying to seduce her into surrender. It's easier this way. Stop resisting. Let the pain end. Kira roared, not with sound but with intent, ripping the memory apart from the inside. She isolated the killer's awareness, tearing at the delicate architecture of his mind with her unstable, unpredictable psychic energy. She felt every fracture, every snapped synapse, every burned memory, as though it were a piece of her own flesh being shredded. The victim's lives, so meticulously catalogued by Aeren, surged in a violent feedback loop through her body. She vomited, foam spilling from her mouth as her lungs burned from the psychic strain. Yet she pressed forward, tearing, shredding, fragmenting every vestige of the host. Aeren screamed. Or maybe it was the static, or maybe it was both. The sound rattled through her bones, twisting the hospital reality around her. Lights exploded overhead in arcs of electricity. Wires sparked, monitors melted down in a chorus of mechanical agony. Shadows coiled like serpents on the walls, twisting in impossible geometries. Yet even as the chaos consumed the room, Kira's focus was absolute. She knew that destroying the coin killer's mind was the only way to expel Aeren, the only path to survival, no matter the cost. Memory after memory fell apart beneath her psychic assault. She experienced the 1945 murder, the 1950, 1955, each one a perfect, mirrored symphony of terror and calculated cruelty. Each act of destruction in the psychic landscape reverberated in her body. Muscles seized, ribs ached as though impaled, eyes burned, and veins pulsed painfully beneath her skin. Rain's face appeared in flashes, a beacon in the storm, grounding her. She reached for him in thought, a lifeline she couldn't afford to lose. "I'm here," he whispered, and she clung to that thread like a drowning woman in a stormy sea. Aeren grew desperate. The demon's form in her mind began to fracture, splitting into shards of glass and shadow that clattered to the floor of the psychic landscape. Its voice, once silky and commanding, fractured into spasms of static and screams, echoing in every corner of the blood-soaked memoryscape. "You cannot destroy me, you are mine, surrender!" But Kira ignored it. She could feel the last strands of the coin killer's mind clinging to the demon, the tether that had allowed Aeren to persist, and she tore at them with methodical, merciless precision. The hospital world mirrored the psychic storm. Machines sparked and groaned. The bed rails vibrated violently, threatening to buckle. Alarms screamed in distorted tones, blending with the screams and laughter in her mind. The air itself seemed to shiver, thick with ozone and metallic tang, each breath a razor slicing across her lungs. Nurses screamed, doctors yelled, but the room was a phantom battleground for forces beyond comprehension. Kira's body writhed in spasms, yet her consciousness moved with terrifying clarity inside the memoryscape, dismantling the demon's foothold piece by piece. She found the final core, the heart of the coin killer's fractured mind where Aeren had nested. It was a twisting, rotting cathedral of memory, the walls lined with mirrors reflecting past murders in endless, looping sequences. Coins spun like haloed orbs, blood spilled and dried in patterns that echoed geometries she could not comprehend. And there it was, Aeren itself, a towering figure of broken glass, shadow, and electricity, its voice now nothing but a grinding static shriek. You cannot survive me." Kira struck with everything she had. She tore through the core of the coin killer's psyche, dismantling the constructs Aeren had built, fragment by fragment. Every pull of psychic energy sent shivers of agony through her spine, burned her nerves, shattered her muscles, and twisted her organs with feedback she could barely endure. She screamed, silent but absolute, in rage and defiance, ripping, shredding, obliterating. The victim's sensations overlapped, assaulted her simultaneously, yet she remained anchored by the fragile threads of her own identity and Aeren's presence. The psychic core imploded. Aeren's form shattered into a cascade of sparks, smoke, and broken mirrors. Its final scream was a grinding metallic wail that vibrated through the room, through Kira's bones, through the air itself. She convulsed violently, foaming at the mouth, her muscles spasming as if they were puppets of the psychic storm. The hospital monitors flatlined in sequence, sparks arcing from equipment, alarms dying in static-riddled bursts. Lights exploded overhead, bathing the room in blinding flashes that carved shadows of the nightmare onto the walls. And then silence, absolute, terrifying silence. Aeren stared at her, pale and trembling, bloodshot eyes wide. Kira lay still, chest rising and falling shallowly, eyes closed, the last tremors of her convulsions fading. Her body was battered beyond recognition, her nervous system shattered, her psychic gift exhausted to its limits. Yet she had survived. Aeren was gone, expelled from the physical and psychic planes. The coin killer's fractured mind was annihilated. The tether broken. The storm ended. For a heartbeat, it seemed she was finally free. Then, one small monitor, black, dead, insignificant, flickered. A pulse of static danced across the screen. A whisper, faint but unmistakable, threaded through the room. Kira? Aeren's breath caught in his throat. He stepped closer, but the whisper did not belong to any machine nor any human. It was a lingering echo, a shard of the demon's presence that refused to vanish completely. Kira's chest rose shallowly, a subtle shiver of life. But the static whispered again, more persistent this time, a reminder that the battle, though seemingly won, was not over. Somewhere, deep inside her shattered conduit, threads of Aeren remained, smoldering embers in the ash of her psychic battlefield. Aeren closed his eyes for a moment, swallowing hard. The room was in ruin, monitors charred, lights flickering, machines melted, and the air thick with burnt ozone and the residue of psychic fire. Yet Kira breathed. Fragile, broken, and still tethered to life. And somewhere, in the hum of static and the lingering shadows, the whisper persisted, her name, calling across the threads of blood and memory.
Thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, comment or review, and tell your friends if you liked it. All my books are available from Amazon and other book retailers. Buy an ebook and show your support.